The crystalline towers of the royal palace of Earthling pierced through the perpetual cloud layer, like fingers of some ancient god, their surfaces catching and refracting the triple sunrise of the Zalithian system. From my position, scrubbing the hangar floor, I could see the morning light paint prismatic patterns across the polished metal, beautiful enough to make you forget that this floating fortress was built on the bones of 1,000 conquered worlds. My name is Daniel Cross, though to the xenodraconic masters of this palace, I was simply Servant 4782. Just another human, another piece of breathing furniture meant to clean their floors, polish their scales when they demanded it, and disappear into the shadows when they grew tired of seeing inferior species in their presence. 3 years. That's how long I'd been playing this role, keeping my head down, my hands busy, and my mouth shut. 3 years of watching these dragon humanoid hybrids strut through their palace with their elongated necks held high, their scales shimmering with genetically enhanced bioluminescence, their wings folded against backs that had never known the weight of true labor. They believed themselves the pinnacle of evolution, the rightful rulers of the galaxy. And why shouldn't they? They had conquered Earth's colonies within a decade, reduced humanity to servitude within 2. The chemical burn of the cleaning solution reminded me to keep moving. Standing still too long attracted attention, and attention in the palace meant pain at best, death at worst. I pushed the magnetic scrubber across the hangar floor, its quiet hum mixing with the distant sound of engine cores warming up. The morning shift of patrol vessels would launch soon, carrying their precious cargo of xenodraconic nobles to inspect their holdings on the surface below. But today, something was different. The restricted section of the hangar, usually sealed behind an energy barrier that would fry anything with human DNA that tried to pass through it, stood open. Not fully open, just a gap where the barrier flickered and sparked, malfunctioning. In 3 years, I'd never seen it fail. The xenodraconics built things to last forever, or at least long enough that the distinction didn't matter to species with human lifespans. I should have kept scrubbing, should have reported the malfunction to the hangar overseer, and earned myself a patronizing pat on the head like a good pet. Instead, I found myself moving closer, the scrubber forgotten behind me. Old instincts died hard, and the engineer in me, the soldier, the human who refused to be broken, whispered that opportunities like this didn't come twice. The restricted section was smaller than I'd imagined, more like an alcove carved into the hangar's wall. Inside, instead of the weapons or advanced technology I'd expected, there was something far more disturbing. Cylinders, dozens of them, each containing a viscous green fluid that pulsed with its own inner light. Suspended in each cylinder was tissue, organic matter that writhed and twisted as if alive. The sight triggered a memory I'd buried deep, a classified briefing from before the fall of Earth's military command. Project Chimera, they'd called it. Biological weapons designed to target specific genetic markers, to wipe out entire species while leaving others untouched. The xenodraconics hadn't just conquered us with superior technology. They'd been preparing to exterminate us. A sound behind me, soft as silk across stone. I turned, ready to face whatever punishment awaited me for trespassing, and found myself staring at something impossible. Princess Lyra, youngest daughter of Queen Celeria, lay crumpled against the wall, her small form barely visible in the shadows. Purple blood, the color of their royal lineage, pooled beneath her, seeping from a wound in her side that looked too precise to be accidental. Her scales, not yet fully hardened with age, flickered between pale silver and the deep black of distress. She couldn't have been more than 7 cycles old, barely more than a hatchling by their standards. Her eyes, golden, like all of her kind but wide, with a fear I recognized as universal, locked onto mine. She tried to speak, but only managed a wet gurgle, more blood coating her throat, choking her words. I had a choice to make. The smart thing, the survivor's thing, would be to walk away, let her die, One less xenodraconic in the universe, even a child, meant humanity was that much closer to freedom. The wound was fatal. She'd be dead in minutes without intervention. All I had to do was nothing. But as I stood there, watching her struggle to breathe, all I could see was another child, human this time, dying in the ruins of New Singapore while xenodraconic patrol ships flew overhead, ignoring the carnage below. We were better than them. I'd told myself for 3 years. We had to be better, or what was the point of surviving? I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands already assessing the damage. The wound was deep but clean, missing the major organs by millimeters. Whoever had done this knew xenodraconic anatomy well enough to make it look fatal, while leaving just enough possibility for survival. An assassination attempt, but a sloppy one. Or perhaps deliberately sloppy. "This is going to hurt," I told her, not knowing if she understood human speech, but needing to say it anyway. From my cleaning supplies, I pulled out the industrial coagulant we used for hazardous spills, not meant for medical use. But it would stop the bleeding. The synthetic skin patches in my pocket, items I'd stolen months ago for emergencies, would seal the wound. She screamed when I applied the coagulant, a sound that was part roar, part child's wail. I worked faster, knowing that scream would bring guards. The synthetic skin adhered to her scales poorly, but it held. I used the binding tape from my uniform to secure it, creating a crude but effective bandage. Her breathing steadied, the golden eyes focusing on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Xenodraconics were predators at their core, and even their children had the instinct to memorize prey. "Human," she whispered, the word accented but clear. "You helped." "Yeah, well, don't get used to it," I muttered, already hearing the thunder of approaching footsteps. "Your people are coming. Try not to die before they get here." The guards burst into the hangar like a storm of scales in fury, their energy weapons drawn and aimed at me before they even assessed the situation. I raised my hands, knowing that any sudden movement would result in my atoms being scattered across the hangar. "Stand down!" The voice cracked like a whip, and the guards immediately lowered their weapons. Queen Celeria herself entered the hangar, her presence filling the space like a physical force. She stood 9 feet tall, her scales a deep burgundy that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her wings, fully extended in what I recognized as a dominance display, spanned 20 feet from tip to tip. The crown of biometal on her head wasn't just decorative. It was a neural interface that connected her to every system in the palace. Her eyes, cold and calculating, took in the scene in an instant. Her daughter, alive but wounded. The human servant, blood on his hands. The open, restricted section behind us both. "Explain," she commanded. The word directed at me with enough force to make my bones ache. "Your daughter was dying," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. I stopped her from doing that. "You touched royal blood," Captain Dravos snarled, stepping forward with his hand on his weapon. "The punishment is death." "He saved me," Lyra said, her voice stronger now. She tried to sit up, wincing at the movement. "The human saved me. Mother." Celeria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She moved closer, each step deliberate, until she stood directly over me. This close, I could smell the ozone scent of her scales, feel the heat radiating from her body. Xenodraconics ran hotter than humans, their metabolism burning at rates that would kill us in hours. "You are Servant 47A2, she said. Not a question but a statement pulled from whatever database she'd accessed through her crown. Assigned to hangar maintenance. 3 years of service. No infractions. No commendations. Invisible. The last word carried a weight of suspicion. In their world, invisible meant dangerous. "I prefer to avoid attention, Your Majesty," I said, which was true enough. Yet, here you are, in a restricted area, having somehow saved my daughter with primitive human medicine. Her head tilted, a gesture that looked almost bird-like. How fortunate that you happened to be here. How skilled that you knew exactly how to treat xenodraconic physiology. The threat in her words was clear. She suspected this was no coincidence. And she was right, though not in the way she thought. I hadn't planned any of this, but my knowledge of their biology wasn't accidental. Years of study, preparation for a war that ended before I could use what I'd learned. Now that knowledge had saved one of them instead of killing them. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I've cleaned medical bays," I lied smoothly. "You pick things up." She studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling she was seeing more than just my surface. Xenodraconics had enhanced perception, could see heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, even the electrical patterns of nervous systems if they focused. Whatever she saw, it made her scales ripple in what I'd learned was their equivalent of a frown. "Take him," she commanded the guards. "Detention level 5. My heart sank. Level 5 was where they kept prisoners for interrogation. More specifically, where they kept them for the kind of interrogation that didn't require the prisoner to survive with their mind intact. "Mother." "No." Lyra tried to stand, managed to get to her feet with obvious effort. "He saved me. You can't." "I can do whatever I wish," Celeria said, her voice gentle when addressing her daughter, but still carrying absolute authority. "He has seen classified materials. He has touched royal blood. The law is clear." "Then change the law," Lyra said, and even the guards looked shocked at her boldness. "You're the queen. If you can't show mercy to someone who saved your daughter, what does that say about our rule?" It was a child's argument, naive and simplistic, but something in it struck a chord. Celeria's scales shifted color slightly, burgundy, lightening to something closer to rust. She looked at me again, and this time I saw calculation rather than suspicion. "You saved my daughter," she said slowly, as if tasting the words. "A human saved xenodraconic royalty. How unusual." She turned to Dravos. "Take him to detention level 2. Comfortable quarters. I'll decide what to do with him after the medical examination of my daughter is complete." Level 2 was minimum security, more like a hotel than a prison. I didn't trust the reprieve, but I'd take it over the alternative. As the guards moved to escort me out, Lyra caught my arm with surprising strength for someone who'd just nearly died. "Thank you," she whispered, and there was something in her golden eyes that looked almost human. I won't forget this. I wanted to tell her that gratitude from her kind meant nothing to me, that I'd saved her for my own reasons, not out of any love for her species, but looking at her, young and wounded, and genuinely grateful. The words died in my throat. She was just a kid, regardless of her scales and wings. Just a kid who'd almost died and was trying to make sense of why an enemy had saved her. The guards pulled me away before I could respond, marching me through corridors I'd cleaned 100 times, but never seen from this perspective, as a prisoner rather than a servant. The difference was subtle but significant. Other servants looked away as we passed, not wanting to associate with whatever crime I'd committed. The xenodraconic nobles we encountered didn't look at all. To them, I'd already ceased to exist. Detention level 2 was indeed comfortable. A suite of rooms that would have been luxurious on Earth before the conquest. Soft lighting that adjusted to human circadian rhythms. A bed designed for our skeletal structure. Even a food synthesizer programmed with human cuisine. It was a cage, but a gilded one. I sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing myself to process what had happened. The biological weapons, Lyra's assassination attempt, my inexplicable decision to save her. None of it made sense as isolated events, but together, they painted a picture of palace intrigue that went deeper than the usual xenodraconic power plays. Someone had wanted Lyra dead, but not obviously dead. Someone with access to the restricted hangar and knowledge of how to make a wound look fatal while leaving room for survival. Someone who might have counted on a human servant, being blamed for either her death or, ironically, her salvation. The door chimed, and I expected guards. Perhaps Dravos coming to finish what the assassin had started. Instead, a xenodraconic I didn't recognize entered, female, judging by the narrower skull structure, with scales of deep blue that marked her as medical caste. She carried a tablet that projected holographic data I couldn't read from my position. "I am Dr. Kalin," she said, her accent less pronounced than most. "I've just finished examining Princess Lyra. Your intervention saved her life." I shrugged, unsure what response she expected. "Right place, right time." "No," she said, moving closer. "Right knowledge, right skills. The coagulant you used should have caused toxic shock in xenodraconic physiology. Unless you knew to mix it with the specific proteins found in your cleaning solution, creating a compound that our bodies can process. The synthetic skin shouldn't have adhered to our scales at all, unless you knew exactly what temperature to heat it to, with the binding tape's thermal properties." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was cursing. I'd been too good, too precise. In trying to save her, I'd revealed knowledge I shouldn't have. "You're not just a servant," Dr. Kalin continued. "Queen Celeria knows this. Captain Dravos suspects it. The question is what she intends to do about it." "And what do you intend to do about it?" I asked, meeting her reptilian gaze directly. She tilted her head, that bird-like gesture they all shared. "I intend to offer you a position in the medical wing. Your knowledge could save lives." "Xenodraconic lives," I pointed out. "Lives," she repeated firmly. "I took an oath when I became a healer, one that predates our conquest of your world by millennia. All life has value. Even humans seem to understand this, given your actions today." Before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Not the sharp, aggressive tone of an attack, but the lower, more urgent sound of a medical emergency. Dr. Kalin's scales paled to almost white as she checked her tablet. "No," she breathed, then louder. "No, this can't be right." "What is it?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Princess Lyra," she said, her voice shaking. "She's dying. The wound has reopened, but worse. There's some kind of biological agent in her bloodstream. Something we've never seen before. The biological weapons. Somehow, whoever had attacked her had infected her with something from those cylinders. Something designed to kill xenodraconics specifically." "Take me to her," I said, standing up. Dr. Kalin hesitated. "You're a prisoner. I don't have the authority. Do you want to explain to the Queen how her daughter died while the one person who might be able to save her sat in a cell?" I asked harshly. "Because I've seen something like this before. In the restricted hangar section. Biological weapons that target specific genetic markers." Her scales rippled through a spectrum of colors I'd never seen before. What I assumed was her species' equivalent of shock. "You know about Project Chimera. So they had a name for it here too. Interesting." "Take me to her," I repeated, now. She made a decision that probably saved Lyra's life. Without calling for authorization, without alerting the guards. She grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the cell. We ran through the corridors, her longer legs forcing me to sprint to keep up. Other xenodraconics tried to stop us, but she snarled something in their language that made them step aside. The medical bay was chaos. Lyra lay on a biobed, her small form convulsing, while machines screamed warnings in languages I didn't understand. Queen Celeria stood beside her, wings fully extended, looking more helpless than a creature of her power should ever appear. Captain Dravos had his weapon drawn, pointed at nothing and everything, as if he could shoot the disease killing the princess. Celeria's voice when she saw me was pure rage. "You did this." "No," Dr. Kalin said quickly. "He knows what this is. He can help." I pushed past them all. Ignoring the weapon, Dravos swung toward me and examined Lyra. Her scales were turning black at the edges, a necrosis I recognized from the classified files I'd studied years ago. Chimera, Variant 7, designed specifically for the Xenodraconic royal bloodline. It would kill her in minutes unless— "I need access to your medical database," I said, already moving to the nearest terminal. "And someone needs to get to the restricted hangar section. There should be a cylinder marked with 7 symbols, probably the 7th from the left. The antidote will be encoded in the same virus that's killing her." "How do you know this?" Celeria demanded. "Because I helped design it," I said, the truth spilling out because there was no time for lies. "Before your people conquered Earth, I was part of a military think tank. We developed theoretical weapons to use against potential alien threats. Project Chimera was mine. The fact that someone has recreated it here, in your palace, means you have a traitor with access to old Earth military files." The silence that followed was deafening. I kept working, pulling up medical scans, correlating data, ignoring the weight of their stares. Lyra convulsed again, weaker this time. Her body was shutting down. "Get the cylinder," Celeria commanded Dravos. "Now!" He hesitated for a moment, clearly unwilling to leave his queen vulnerable with a confessed enemy agent. But her glare sent him running. I worked frantically, using the palace's superior technology to model the virus's progression. The Xenodraconics might be our conquerors, but they'd never faced biological warfare like this. Humans had been perfecting the art of killing each other with diseases for millennia. It was perhaps our darkest talent, and now it might save one of them. "Why?" Celeria asked, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "Why save her if you created the weapon meant to kill her?" "I created theoretical weapons," I said, not looking up from my work. "Ideas on paper, nothing more. I never wanted them made real. And she's a child, human or Xenodraconic. Children don't deserve to die for their parents' wars." Dravos returned with the cylinder, handling it like it might explode. In a way, it could. If broken, the biological agent inside would kill every Xenodraconic in the palace within hours. I took it carefully, extracting a sample with the medical bay's tools. The antidote was there, encoded in the virus's own RNA, a safeguard I'd built into the design in case of accidental exposure. "This is going to hurt her," I warned, preparing the injection. "The cure is almost as violent as the disease, but it's the only way." Celeria nodded, her hand finding her daughter's smaller one. It was the most human gesture I'd seen from any of them. I administered the injection, and Lyra's body went rigid. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. She didn't breathe. Then, with a gasp that sounded like a drowning person breaking the surface, she sucked in air. The black at the edges of her scales began to recede, slowly at first, then faster. "It's working," Dr. Kalin breathed, checking her readings. "By the eternal flame, it's actually working." I stepped back, exhaustion hitting me like a physical force. I'd just saved the life of a Xenodraconic princess, twice in one day, using knowledge from my past life, a life I'd tried to bury when I became just another servant. The irony was overwhelming. "Arrest him," Celeria said, and I wasn't even surprised. But before the guards could move, Lyra's hand shot out, grabbing her mother's arm with surprising strength. "No," she said, her voice rough but determined. "He saved me. Twice. He is under my protection." "You don't have the authority," Dravos started. "I am invoking the right of debt," Lyra said, and the room went silent again. "By ancient law, one who saves royal blood 3 times may claim a boon. He has saved me twice. I owe him one more salvation, and until that debt is paid, he is under my protection." It was absurd, a child invoking ancient law to protect an enemy agent. But I saw the calculation in Celeria's eyes. This was useful to her, having a human with my knowledge bound to her daughter, a tool she could use. "Very well," the Queen said. "The right of debt is acknowledged. The human will serve in the palace medical wing under Dr. Kalen's supervision. He will be monitored at all times. Any attempt to escape or cause harm will result in immediate execution." She turned to me, and her smile was all predator. "You are no longer invisible. Daniel Cross. Yes, I know your real name. I know exactly who you were before you became Servant 4782. Military engineer, weapons designer, one of Earth's brightest minds before we crushed your resistance. And now you're mine." "I belong to no one," I said quietly. "We'll see about that," she said. Then, swept out of the medical bay with the kind of dramatic exit only a 9-foot-tall dragon woman could pull off. I looked down at Lyra, who was watching me with those golden eyes that seemed far too knowing for her age. "Thank you," I said, meaning it despite myself. "We're even," she said. "For now. But Father always said debts have a way of growing when you're not watching them." I wanted to ask about her father, about who had tried to kill her, about why she'd chosen to protect me. But Dr. Kalen was already ushering me out, talking rapidly about quarantine procedures and medical protocols and a dozen other things that meant my life as an invisible servant was over. As we walked through the palace corridors, I caught sight of my reflection in a polished surface. Same face, same human features that marked me as inferior in this place. But something had changed. The mask I'd worn for 3 years, the servile expression that had kept me alive, was gone. In its place was something more dangerous. Hope. For 3 years, I'd survived by being nobody. Now, thrust into the heart of palace politics, protected by a child's ancient law and the Queen's calculated mercy, I had a chance to be somebody again. Not the soldier I'd been, not the servant I'd pretended to be, but something new, something that might, just might, be able to change things. The restricted hangar section had been sealed again when we passed it, but I knew what lay behind those barriers now. Weapons designed to exterminate entire species. Weapons based on human designs, sitting in the heart of the Xenodraconic Empire. Someone had put them there. Someone who wanted the royal family dead. That someone had failed today, but they would try again. And when they did, I would be ready. Because I was no longer just Daniel Cross, failed soldier and defeated human. I was the human who had saved the princess, the one who understood both xenodraconic biology and human weapons, the bridge between two species that had only known how to destroy each other. The game had changed, and for the first time since Earth's colonies fell, I was a player instead of a pawn. The medical wing was located in the palace's central spire, a location that gave it access to natural light from 3 different suns. The Xenodraconics believed sunlight had healing properties, which wasn't entirely wrong from a biological standpoint. As Dr. Kalen led me through the main treatment area, I noticed how different it was from the sterile, artificial medical bays humans preferred. Living walls covered in bioluminescent plants provided both oxygen and a natural filtration system. The air smelled of ozone and something floral. Not unpleasant, but definitely alien. "You'll be quartered here," Dr. Kalen said, showing me to a small room adjacent to the main medical bay. It was larger than my servants' quarters had been, with a window that looked out over the cloud sea below. "The monitoring system is already active. Any attempt to leave the medical wing without authorization will trigger the security protocols." "Meaning I'll be vaporized," I translated. "Essentially, yes." She paused at the door, her scales shifting to a pattern I was beginning to recognize as uncertainty. "What you did today, saving Princess Lyra, it changes things. There are those in the palace who will see you as a threat. Others will see you as an opportunity. Be careful who you trust." "I don't trust anyone," I said honestly. "Not even the princess whose protection you now carry." I thought about Lyra, about the determination in her young eyes when she'd invoked that ancient law. Especially not her. Children grow up, debts get repaid, and then, what happens to the human who knows too much? Dr. Kalin made a sound that might have been their equivalent of a sigh. You think like one of us. That will either save you or destroy you. She left me alone then, and I took stock of my new situation. The room was simple but functional. A bed, a desk with a terminal I probably couldn't access, a small sanitization unit. The window was reinforced with an energy field that would kill me if I tried to break through it. A comfortable prison, but a prison nonetheless. I sat at the desk and found, to my surprise, that the terminal was active. Limited access, of course. Medical databases only. Nothing that could be used to communicate outside the palace or access sensitive information. But it was more than I'd had in 3 years. I began reading, absorbing everything I could about xenodraconic physiology, their medical practices, their diseases and cures. Knowledge was survival, and I intended to survive. Hours passed before I was interrupted. A soft chime at my door, followed by it sliding open to reveal an unexpected visitor. Princess Lyra stood there, no longer in medical robes, but dressed in the elaborate scaled armor that young royalty wore. She looked healthier, her scales back to their normal silver sheen. But there was a carefulness to her movements that suggested she was still healing. You shouldn't be here, I said, not bothering to stand. Royal protocol demanded I prostrate myself. But we were past that now. I go where I wish in my mother's palace, she said, entering uninvited and sitting on my bed with the casual authority of someone who'd never been denied anything. I wanted to ask you something. Ask? Why did you really save me? I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She was young, but not naive. Growing up in the xenodraconic court meant learning to see past surface motivations before you could properly fly. Would you believe me if I said it was the right thing to do? No, she said immediately. Humans and xenodraconics have been killing each other for 20 years. Right and wrong stopped mattering long ago. Smart kid. Too smart, maybe. I saved you because letting you die would have been what they expected. I said finally. Your kind expects humans to be either servile or savage. Saving you was neither. It was unexpected. And unexpected actions create unexpected opportunities. She tilted her head. That bird-like gesture that all her kind shared. You saved me to create chaos. I saved you because you were a child dying in front of me, I admitted. Everything else, the opportunities and chaos and political implications, that came after. In that moment, you were just a kid who needed help. And the second time, when you knew what the cure would cost you, that was harder to answer. The second time had been calculated, weighing the cost of revealing myself against the potential benefits of having a royal debt. The second time was about survival, I said. Yours and mine. She seemed satisfied with that answer, or at least accepting of it. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. My mother thinks she owns you now, she said. She's wrong. The right of debt means you belong to me until the third salvation, and I protect what's mine. I don't belong to anyone. I repeated what I'd told her mother. No, she agreed. But you're under my protection whether you accept it or not. And there are worse things in this palace than being owned by the queen. She left before I could ask what she meant. But I had a feeling I'd find out soon enough. That night, as I lay in my new bed staring at the alien constellations through my window, I thought about the cylinders in the restricted hangar, Project Chimera, weaponized and waiting. Someone in this palace was planning genocide, and they'd started with the royal family. The question was whether they were targeting all xenodraconics or just the current regime. And the bigger question, did I care which? 3 years as a servant had taught me to see the xenodraconics as individuals rather than a monolithic enemy. There were cruel ones like Captain Dravos, Pragmatic ones like Queen Celeria, compassionate ones like Dr. Kalen, and complex ones like Lyra. They weren't the monsters human propaganda had made them out to be before the conquest. They were people, with all the good and evil that entailed. But they were still our conquerors. They still held humanity in chains, even if those chains were gilded for some of us. The biological weapons in that hangar could shift the balance of power, could give humanity a fighting chance at freedom, if I was willing to commit genocide to achieve it. I closed my eyes, trying to quiet the moral debate raging in my head. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices. For tonight, I was alive, no longer invisible, and positioned in a place where I could actually make a difference. Whether that difference would save lives or end them remained to be seen. The palace hummed around me, a living thing of metal and energy and ambition. Somewhere in its halls, an assassin plotted their next move. Somewhere else, a queen calculated how to use her new human asset. And in her quarters, a young princess probably wondered why her enemy had become her savior. The game was indeed changing, and I was no longer sure which side I was playing for. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the sides themselves were an illusion, and the real game was something else entirely. I drifted off to sleep thinking about Lyra's golden eyes and the way she'd said, "I protect what's mine." It should have been a threat. Instead, it felt like a promise. Tomorrow, I would start learning what that promise meant. The medical wing became my new world, but it was Dr. Kalen who became my unexpected teacher. Over the following weeks, she would arrive each morning with that particular tilt to her head that meant she had something challenging planned. Today was no different, except for the small device she carried, no larger than my thumb and pulsing with a soft blue light. "Neural interface," she said without preamble, setting it on the examination table between us. "Modified for human physiology. If you're going to work here effectively, you need to understand our medical systems at a deeper level than your current terminal access allows." I stared at the device with deep suspicion. Neural interfaces were how the Xenodraconics controlled their technology, but they were also how they controlled their slaves on the mining worlds. That's illegal for humans to use. "Many things are illegal," Dr. Kalen replied. Her scales, shifting to a pattern I'd learned, indicated amusement. Saving a princess with forbidden knowledge was illegal. Having a human in the medical wing is illegal. Yet here we are. She had a point, but that didn't make me any more eager to have Xenodraconic technology interfacing with my brain. "What's the real reason?" "There was another assassination attempt last night," she said quietly, her scales immediately shifting to darker blues. "Not on Lyra. On one of the minor nobles, Lord Vaex. He survived, but barely. The poison used was something we've never seen before, something that attacked his nervous system in ways our medicine couldn't predict." "And you think I might recognize it?" "I think whoever is doing this has access to more than just Project Chimera. They have Earth knowledge, Earth weapons, Earth tactics. You're the only human in this palace with the clearance and expertise to help us understand what we're facing." I picked up the neural interface, feeling its warm pulse against my palm. It was a risk, but everything in this palace was a risk now. What happens if my human neurology rejects it? Best case, severe headaches for a few days. Worst case, permanent brain damage or death. She was nothing if not honest. But I've modified it based on my study of human anatomy. The risk is minimal. Minimal for her, maybe. But I'd already crossed too many lines to stop now. I pressed the device against the base of my skull, where human and Xenodraconic nervous systems were most similar, and activated it. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like someone had poured molten metal directly into my brain. I must have screamed because Dr. Kalen was suddenly there, her clawed hands surprisingly gentle as she steadied me. Then, as quickly as it had come, the pain vanished, replaced by something far stranger. I could feel the palace. Not metaphorically, but literally feel it. Every system, every network, every flow of data and energy was suddenly visible to me in a way that had nothing to do with sight. The medical databases I'd been studying appeared in my mind, not as text, but as pure knowledge, instantly accessible and understood. But there was more. So much more. Shadows in the data, hidden partitions and encrypted channels that even Dr. Kalin probably didn't know existed. Fascinating, Dr. Kalin breathed, watching the readings on her medical scanner. Your brain is interfacing at 93% efficiency. Most xenodraconics only achieve 80% with their natural biology. Humans are adaptable, I managed to say, though speaking felt strange when my consciousness was spread through the palace's networks. It's our only evolutionary advantage. A chime at the door interrupted us, and Captain Dravos entered without waiting for permission. His hand wasn't on his weapon for once, but his posture radiated threat. The Queen requires the human's presence. He's in the middle of a medical procedure, Dr. Kalin protested. Now, Dravos said, and his tone made it clear this wasn't a request. The throne room was as ostentatious as every other royal space in the palace, but with an edge of functionality that reminded everyone this was a seat of power, not just ceremony. Queen Celeria sat on a throne that was part furniture, part computer, part weapon system. Her crown glowed brighter here, connected to networks that probably spanned the entire planet below. She wasn't alone. A dozen nobles stood in a semicircle, their scales showing various patterns of agitation and anger. At the center of their attention was a figure I recognized but had never seen in person. Marcus Reed, the human administrator of the Northern Continental Factories. A collaborator in the eyes of most humans. A useful tool in the eyes of the xenodraconics. Daniel Cross, the Queen said, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. You've been teaching my medical staff about human biological weapons. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I've been helping them understand the threats facing the palace. And in doing so, you've revealed that humans have been developing weapons specifically designed to kill us for decades. This from one of the nobles, Lord Thex, whose scales were almost white with age. Weapons that are now being used against us. Weapons that were theoretical until someone in this palace made them real, I countered, forgetting for a moment that I was supposed to be subservient. Someone with access to classified Earth military files and xenodraconic biological samples. You dare suggest one of us is a traitor? Another noble snarled. I suggest nothing. I simply state facts. Queen Celeria raised one wing slightly, and the room fell silent. Marcus Reed has brought disturbing news from the surface. Tell them what you told me. Reed stepped forward, his augmented eyes focusing on me with an intensity that was distinctly inhuman. He'd had work done, surgical modifications to make him more palatable to his xenodraconic masters. It made my skin crawl. 3 facilities have reported missing personnel in the last month, he said, his voice artificially smooth. All of them human, all with backgrounds in chemistry or biology. Security footage shows them leaving voluntarily, but no trace of them has been found since. Recruitment, I said immediately. Someone's building a team. For what purpose? Queen Celeria asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. The same purpose as the biological weapons. Revolution, assassination, or genocide. Possibly all 3. The nobles erupted in angry voices, but I kept my focus on the Queen. She was studying me with those cold, calculating eyes, seeing past the surface to something deeper. You could stop this, she said suddenly, silencing the room. A human with your knowledge, your newfound access to our systems, could identify the traitor. And why would I do that? Because Princess Lyra's life depends on it, she said simply. The assassin failed twice. They won't fail a 3rd time unless we stop them first. It was manipulation, pure and simple, but it was also true. Whoever was behind this wouldn't stop until the royal family was dead, and Lyra, for all her precociousness, was still just a child. "I'll need resources," I said. "Access to the restricted sections, freedom to move through the palace, and a team." "You'll have what you need," the Queen agreed. "But you'll also have supervision. Captain Dravos will accompany you at all times." I looked at Dravos, who was clearly unhappy with this arrangement. The feeling was mutual. "There's one more thing," Reed said, and something in his tone made everyone turn to him. "The missing humans. They all had families, children. Those children are also missing." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Taking adults was one thing, but children, that changed the nature of what we were dealing with. "Find them," Queen Celeria commanded, and for the first time, I heard something that might have been genuine emotion in her voice. "Find them all." "The first place I insisted on investigating was the restricted hangar section," Dravos protested. But the Queen's orders were clear. I had access to whatever I needed. The energy barrier fell at my approach, the neural interface allowing me to bypass security that would have killed me weeks ago. The cylinders were still there, but something was different. I counted them twice to be sure. There were 42 cylinders when I was here before. Now there are 38. "You're certain?" Dravos asked, his hand moving to his weapon. "Positive. 4 weapons are missing, different variants, judging by the gaps." I moved to the nearest terminal, letting the neural interface connect me to its data streams. What I found made my blood run cold. The missing cylinders contained Chimera variants 3, 9, 15, and 21. "What does that mean?" 3 targets respiratory systems, 9 targets neural networks, 15 causes cellular breakdown, and 21. I paused, double-checking the data. 21 is a carrier variant. It doesn't kill directly but turns the infected into disease vectors. They spread the infection without showing symptoms. Dravos's scales went pale. "They could infect the entire palace without us knowing." "Not the entire palace," I corrected, pulling up architectural plans through the interface. "The ventilation systems are segregated by level and section, but they could take out entire wings before we detected it. We need to alert the Queen immediately." Wait. Something in the data had caught my attention. Each cylinder had an access log, hidden, but not deleted. Someone accessed these cylinders 16 days ago, 3 days before Lyra was attacked. "Who?" I traced the access code through the palace's labyrinthine security systems. The neural interface made it easier, but whoever had done this was clever. They'd routed their access through multiple terminals, using different authorization codes at each step. But everyone made mistakes. And this person's mistake was using a medical override at one point in the chain. "The access originated from the medical wing," I said slowly, the implications settling over me like a cold weight. "Dr. Kalin." Dravos sounded almost eager at the prospect of arresting her. "No. Her access codes are different, and she was in surgery during this timestamp." I dug deeper, following data trails that twisted back on themselves. But someone with medical knowledge did this. Someone who understood both xenodraconic and human biology well enough to select exactly the right weapons. A memory surfaced. Something Dr. Kalin had said about the neural interface. She'd modified it based on her study of human anatomy. But how extensive was that study, and who else had access to it? "We need to get back to the medical wing," I said urgently. "Now." We arrived to find chaos. 3 xenodraconics were on biobeds, their scales flickering through distress patterns while medical staff rushed around them. Dr. Kalin looked up as we entered, relief visible in her posture. "Thank the eternal flame you're here," she said. "It's variant 9, the neural toxin, but it's been modified. Our treatments aren't working." I moved to the nearest patient, letting the interface connect me to the medical scanners. The toxin was variant 9, but with subtle changes that made it resistant to standard treatments. Whoever had done this understood both the original human design and xenodraconic physiology well enough to optimize the weapon. "I need a sample of their blood," I said, already moving to the medical synthesizer. "And access to the protein sequencer." "What are you doing?" Dravos demanded. "Creating an antidote, but I need to understand how the toxin was modified first." I worked frantically, the interface allowing me to process data at speeds that would have been impossible otherwise. The modification was elegant in its simplicity. A few switched proteins that made the toxin bond differently, with xenodraconic neurons. It was the kind of modification that required deep understanding of both species biology. "There," I said finally, inputting the antidote formula into the synthesizer. "This should work, but we need to move fast." Dr. Kalin administered the antidote without hesitation, trusting my work completely. Within minutes, the patient's conditions began to stabilize. "How?" she asked, looking at me with something approaching awe. "How did you understand the modification so quickly?" "Because I've seen this style before," I admitted. "The way the proteins were switched, the specific binding sites targeted. This is how Earth military bioweapons specialists were trained to think. Whoever did this had the same training I did." "But you're the only human in the palace with that knowledge," Dravos said suspiciously. "No," I said quietly, a terrible possibility occurring to me. "I'm the only human you know about with that knowledge." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring through the medical wing. Not medical alarms, but security alerts. On the monitors, I could see guards rushing through corridors, converging on a location in the lower levels. "What's happening?" Dr. Kalin demanded. A guard's voice crackled over the communication system. "We've found them. The missing humans. They're in the old detention center, Level 9. Level 9 had been abandoned for years, deemed too energy-intensive to maintain. It was the perfect place to hide something you didn't want found. "We're going," I said, already moving toward the door. "You're medical staff, not security," Dravos protested. "And if those humans have been infected with Variant 21, the carrier strain, your security won't know until it's too late." I met his gaze steadily. "You need me there." He clearly wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. We descended into the palace's depths, the gleaming corridors giving way to older, more utilitarian passages. The air grew colder, and I could feel through the interface that we were moving beyond the main power grid into sections running on backup systems. The old detention center was a relic from the early days of xenodraconic occupation, when they'd needed to process thousands of human prisoners. Now, it was a maze of empty cells and abandoned interrogation rooms. The guards had gathered outside a massive sealed door, their weapons drawn but their postures uncertain. "Stand aside," Dravos ordered, moving to the door's control panel. It was an older model, requiring physical input rather than neural interface. He entered his override codes, and the door ground open with a protest of long, unused mechanisms. The smell hit us first. Not death, but something worse. The sweet, cloying scent of the preservation fluids used in the biological weapon cylinders. Inside, the missing humans stood in neat rows, their eyes vacant, their bodies unnaturally still. The children were in front, maybe a dozen of them, ranging from small toddlers to teenagers. "Don't approach them," I warned, recognizing the signs immediately. "They're infected. Variant 21, just as I suspected." "But they're just standing there," one of the guards said. "They're carriers now. Their bodies are producing the toxin, waiting for the trigger command to release it." I studied them through the interface, seeing the biological changes that had been wrought. Someone turned them into living weapons. "Can you cure them?" Dravos asked. I wanted to say yes, but the interface was showing me the extent of the modification. Their cells had been fundamentally altered, their DNA rewritten to produce the toxin. "I can try, but it will take time, and we need to keep them isolated until..." A child moved. Just a small girl. maybe 6 years old, taking a single step forward. Her eyes were still vacant, but her mouth opened, and she spoke in a voice that wasn't her own. "Hello, Daniel." I recognized the voice instantly, though I hadn't heard it in over 3 years. The voice of someone I'd thought died when Earth's resistance fell. Someone who'd worked alongside me on Project Chimera, who knew every detail of its design because she'd helped create it. "Sarah," I breathed. The child's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Surprised you shouldn't be. You always knew I was better at this than you." "Dr. Sarah Chen was declared dead after the Singapore incident," Dravos said sharply. "Dr. Sarah Reeves," I corrected automatically. She never used her married name professionally, and apparently, reports of her death were exaggerated. The child spoke again, Sarah's voice coming from that small throat. "The Xenodraconics thought they could conquer us, subjugate us, make us forget what we are. But humans have always been best at one thing, haven't we? Daniel, survival. By any means necessary." "You're going to kill children to make your point?" I asked, horrified. "I'm going to free humanity," the child replied. "The royal family is just the beginning. Every Xenodraconic in this palace will die, and their deaths will spark uprisings across the planet. The weapons you helped create will finally serve their purpose. Those weapons were meant to be deterrence, not genocide. Deterrence only work if your enemy fears you. The Xenodraconics will never fear us while they live. So they all have to die." The child stepped back into line, her eyes closing. All the humans in the room exhaled simultaneously, a sound that should have been breathing, but was actually the release of airborne toxins. The guards started choking immediately, their scales turning black at the edges. "Everyone out!" I shouted, grabbing the nearest guard and pulling him toward the door. "Seal the room, full containment." We barely made it out before the toxins could spread further. The guards who'd been exposed were already showing severe symptoms. I worked frantically, using the medical supplies they carried to synthesize a basic antidote. But I knew it was only buying time. "We need to evacuate the palace," I said urgently. "Sarah won't stop with this. She has 4 biological weapons, and the knowledge to use them effectively." "The Queen will never agree to evacuation," Dravos said, though his scales were pale with fear. "Then the Queen will die," I said bluntly, "along with everyone else here." As if in response to my words, explosions rocked the palace. Not big ones, but precisely placed charges that I recognized immediately. She was taking out the ventilation controls, forcing the air systems into emergency circulation mode. It would spread any airborne toxins throughout the palace within hours. She's not working alone, I realized. She couldn't have placed those charges while controlling the infected humans. "Who would help her?" Dr. Kalin asked, having arrived with more medical supplies. I thought about the access logs, the medical override, the intimate knowledge of palace systems. Someone who's been here all along, someone trusted, someone with medical knowledge and access to restricted areas. My eyes met Dr. Kalin's, and I saw the same terrible suspicion there. We both knew there were only a handful of people in the palace who fit that description, and one of them was standing right next to us. "Captain Dravos," I said carefully, "I need you to quietly arrest everyone with medical clearance above level 3. Don't alert them. Don't give them time to react. Just contain them until we can sort this out." He looked like he wanted to protest, but the situation was too dire for jurisdictional disputes. "It will be done." As he left to carry out the arrests, I turned to Dr. Kalin. "I need you to trust me now. Sarah is planning something bigger than just releasing toxins. She knows I'm here, knows I can counter her weapons. This is personal for her." "Personal how?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. "We were partners once, more than professionally. When the Xenodraconics invaded, we were separated. I thought she died in Singapore when the military base fell. But if she survived, if she's been planning this for 3 years, she blames you for abandoning her." Dr. Kalin finished. Or she blames me for not dying with her. I moved to the nearest terminal, interfacing with the palace systems. Either way, she won't stop until she's destroyed everything I might care about, including Princess Lyra. The question hit like a physical blow. Of course, Sarah knew me well enough to know I'd protect the child, even if she was xenodraconic. It was my nature, my weakness. And Sarah had always been brilliant at exploiting weaknesses. We need to find Lyra, I said urgently, now. But when we tried to access the princess's location through the palace systems, we found only static. Someone had disabled the tracking in the royal quarters. We ran through corridors, filling with panic as more explosions shook the structure. Guards rushed past us, their communications crackling with reports of systems failing throughout the palace. We found Lyra in her chambers, but she wasn't alone. A figure in medical robes stood beside her, a syringe pressed against the princess's neck. When the figure turned, I wasn't entirely surprised to see who it was. "Hello, Daniel," Marcus Reed said, his augmented eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "Sarah sends her regards." Of course. Reed, the collaborator, the one who'd brought news of the missing humans. He'd been perfectly positioned to coordinate between the surface and the palace, to move resources and information without suspicion. "Let her go, Reed, she's a child." "She's a xenodraconic," he corrected. "That makes her the enemy." "She's 7 years old. And in 20 years, she'll be queen, continuing the subjugation of our species." His hand was steady on the syringe. "Unless we end it here." Lyra's eyes found mine, and there was no fear there, only a strange calm. "It's okay, Daniel. I understand." "No," I said firmly. "Reed, think about what you're doing. Killing her won't free humanity. It'll just prove to the xenodraconics that we're exactly what they think we are. Savage, treacherous, and irredeemable. Better to be feared than pitied. Better to be respected," I countered. "Which we'll never be if we murder children." Reed's augmented eyes flickered. And for a moment, I saw uncertainty there, but before he could respond, Lyra moved. Despite her young age, she had the reflexes of a predator species. Her tail, which I'd barely noticed coiled beneath her, struck out like a whip, knocking the syringe from Reed's hand. She rolled away from him, toward me, and I caught her instinctively. Reed lunged for the syringe, but Dr. Kalin was faster. Her claws raked across his augmented eyes, destroying the technology in a shower of sparks. He screamed, stumbling backward, blind and disoriented. "The princess!" Captain Dravos's voice came from the doorway. He'd returned with a squad of guards, all wearing emergency breathing apparatus. "Is she safe?" "For now," I said, still holding Lyra protectively. "But Sarah's not done. This was just a distraction." From what Dravos demanded. Through the neural interface, I felt a shift in the palace's systems. Power was being rerouted, massive amounts of it, all flowing toward a single location, the throne room. "She's going for the queen," I realized. "And the throne's connection to the planetary defense grid. If she can access that, she could turn the orbital weapons on the cities below," Dravos finished, his scales going white with horror. We ran through the palace, Lyra surprisingly keeping pace despite her recent ordeal. The throne room's massive doors were sealed when we arrived, but I could feel the energy building inside through the interface. Sarah was in there with the queen, and she was doing something to the throne's systems. "Can you override the doors?" Dravos asked. "Not without triggering whatever trap she's set." I studied the data flows, seeing the elegant web of kill commands she'd woven. She's had years to plan this. Every contingency has been considered. "Not everyone," Lyra said quietly. She moved to a section of wall that looked identical to every other, pressing her small hand against it. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage. "Royal escape route. Mother doesn't know I know about it." We entered the passage, moving through darkness, lit only by the faint bioluminescence of Lyra's scales. It opened onto a balcony overlooking the throne room, and what we saw there stopped us cold. Queen Celeria was on her throne, but she wasn't moving. Thin cables ran from the throne to a figure standing before it. Someone I barely recognized as Sarah. 3 years had changed her, augmented her. She was more machine than human now. Her body a fusion of Earth and xenodraconic technology. "Magnificent, isn't it?" she said, not looking up at us. "The throne is a neural interface on a planetary scale. With the right modifications, it can control not just the defense grid, but every networked system on the planet. Every medical bay, every transport, every life support system." "You'll kill millions," I said, "humans included." "Acceptable losses. Humanity will survive. We always do. But the age of xenodraconic rule ends today." "No," Lyra said, stepping forward to the balcony's edge. "It doesn't." Sarah looked up then, her augmented eyes focusing on the princess. "The little princess, Daniel's new pet project. Did you really think he cared about you? Child, he's using you, just like I'm using these systems. Humans and xenodraconics can never coexist. One must dominate, or both will destroy each other." "You're wrong," Lyra said simply. "Daniel saved me because that's who he is, and I protected him because that's who I am. We chose to see each other as people, not as enemies." "Naive child." "I invoke the right of judgment," Lyra interrupted, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "As heir to the throne, I claim the right to judge crimes against the crown." Sarah laughed. "You think your laws matter now?" "They matter to me," Lyra said. Then, to my shock, she jumped from the balcony. Her wings, still developing but functional enough for gliding, spread wide as she descended toward the throne. Sarah raised a weapon, something cobbled together from human and xenodraconic technology. But I was already moving. The neural interface let me reach into the throne room systems, not to attack, but to defend. I triggered every emergency protocol simultaneously, flooding the room with fire suppression foam, emergency lighting, and magnetic fields meant to contain reactor breaches. It was chaos, but it was enough. Lyra reached her mother, her small hands touching the queen's face. "Mother, wake up, please." Something in that touch, that plea from daughter to mother, broke through whatever hold Sarah had established. Queen Celeria's eyes opened, blazing with fury. "You dare!" she hissed at Sarah, rising from her throne with terrifying grace. Sarah fired her weapon, but the queen was faster. Centuries of evolution had made the xenodraconics apex predators, and Celeria was royalty even among them. She moved like liquid shadow, avoiding the energy blast and closing the distance in a heartbeat. Her claws found Sarah's throat, but she didn't strike. "You would genocide my people," the queen said coldly. "You would murder my daughter. You would turn my own throne against me. Tell me why I shouldn't end you here." Sarah smiled, blood running from where the claws had pierced her skin slightly. "Because the moment my heart stops, every biological weapon in this palace releases simultaneously. I am the dead man's switch." It was a stalemate. Kill Sarah, and everyone died. Let her live, and she'd find another way to complete her plan. "There's a third option," I said, descending from the balcony using an emergency ladder. "Sarah, you're dying anyway, aren't you? The augmentations, the forced integration of incompatible technologies. You have weeks, maybe days." Her smile faltered slightly. "Observant as always, Daniel." "Let me help you," I offered, moving closer despite every instinct screaming danger. Not to survive, but to die with meaning instead of massacre. Pretty words from the man who abandoned me. "I thought you were dead. If I'd known—" "You'd have what saved me, like you saved the princess." Her laugh was bitter. I don't want salvation, Daniel. I want justice. Then let's get it, I said. But not through genocide, through change. Real, lasting change. I reached out through the neural interface. Not to the palace systems, but to Sarah's augmentations. She was networked too. Her consciousness spread through multiple systems just like mine was now. I could feel her pain, her rage, but underneath it, the brilliant mind I'd once loved. Look, I said, sharing my memories through the connection. Look at what I've seen here. I showed her Dr. Kalin, working tirelessly to save both human and xenodraconic lives. I showed her Lyra, choosing to protect a human despite everything her species had taught her. I showed her the small moments of kindness, the gradual changes, the possibility of something better than endless war. Fantasy, she whispered, but I could feel her wavering. Maybe, I admitted, but isn't it better than mutual annihilation? Through our connection, I felt the moment she made her decision. The biological weapons began powering down, their deadly contents neutralizing. The cables connecting her to the throne went dark. You always were an idealist, she said, her augmented systems finally failing. Maybe that's why I loved you. She collapsed, and I caught her, holding her as her hybrid body finally gave out. In her final moments, she was just Sarah again, brilliant and broken and human. Make it mean something, she whispered. Both of us. Make it mean something. And then she was gone. The throne room was silent, except for the drip of fire suppression foam and the hum of resetting systems. Queen Celeria stood over us, her expression unreadable. Lyra moved to stand beside her mother, their tails intertwining in what I'd learned was a gesture of family solidarity. You saved us all, the Queen said finally. We saved each other, I corrected, standing with Sarah's body in my arms. That's what people do. Is it? She studied me with those ancient eyes. Is that what we are to each other now, people? I thought about everything that had happened. Everything that might still happen. It's a start. She nodded slowly. Then we start. The funeral rites for Sarah were held in the human section of the palace, a place I hadn't even known existed until Dr. Kalin showed me the way. It was a small chamber, barely larger than my quarters, where human servants were allowed to grieve their dead before the bodies were processed for recycling. The xenodraconics found our burial customs wasteful, but they permitted this small space for what they called our primitive emotional needs. I stood alone with Sarah's body, which I'd insisted on preparing myself. The augmentations had been removed, leaving her looking more like the woman I'd known years ago. Brilliant, driven, and ultimately consumed by a war neither of us had asked for. You loved her. Lyra's voice came from the doorway. She entered without invitation, as was her way. Her scales dim with what I'd learned was their expression of respect for the dead. Once, I admitted, before the war changed us both. She tried to kill everyone I care about, Lyra said. But there was no anger in it, just a child trying to understand. Yet you mourn her. She was broken by loss, twisted by pain into something she never wanted to be. Yes, I mourn her. I mourn who she was and who she could have been. Lyra moved closer, studying Sarah's face with those golden eyes that saw too much. Mother says humans are driven by emotion more than logic, that it makes you weak. Sometimes, I agreed. But it also makes us strong in ways your people don't always understand. Teach me, she said suddenly. Teach me to understand humans the way you're learning to understand us. It was an unexpected request. But before I could respond, Captain Dravos appeared in the doorway. The Queen commands your presence, both of you. The throne room had been repaired with the efficiency the xenodraconics were known for. No trace remained of the battle that had nearly ended in genocide. But something had changed. The throne itself had been modified. Additional safeguards visible in the neural network I could still sense through my interface. Queen Celeria stood before the throne rather than sitting on it, and arranged before her were holographic displays, showing parts of the palace I'd never seen. "Daniel Cross," she began without preamble. "The investigation into Sarah Reeves' conspiracy has revealed disturbing truths." The displays shifted, showing a complex web of connections, communications, and resource movements spanning 3 years. She didn't work alone. The network she built extends throughout the palace and to the surface below. Humans, but also others. "Others?" I asked, though I suspected what she meant. "Xenodraconics," Dravos said, his disgust evident. "Members of our own nobility have been funding and supporting human terrorist cells." "Not terrorism," a new voice interrupted. Lord Thex entered, his ancient scales rattling with each step. "Revolution, the natural order reasserting itself." The Queen's scales flared with barely controlled rage. "You admit your treason?" "I admit to seeing what you refuse to acknowledge," Thex replied calmly. "Our empire is dying. Celeria. The humans are just the latest symptom of a disease that's been growing for generations." "Explain yourself," the Queen commanded, though her posture suggested she was ready to strike him down at the slightest provocation. Thex moved to the displays, manipulating them with the ease of long practice. New data appeared, showing population statistics, resource allocation, and genetic diversity charts. "We are a dying species. Our birth rates have been declining for 2 centuries. Our genetic diversity is narrowing with each generation of selective breeding. We conquered world after world, not for glory, but out of desperation, seeking something to reverse our decline." "And you thought genocide was the answer?" I asked incredulously. "No," Thex said, turning his ancient eyes to me. "I thought forced evolution was... The humans have something we lack: adaptability. Sarah Reeves understood this. Her augmentations weren't just technology grafted onto flesh. She was becoming something new, a hybrid that could have been the future of both our species." "She was dying," I pointed out. "The augmentations were killing her." "Because she rushed the process," Thex admitted. "But the principle was sound. We need each other, humans and Xenodraconics. Not as master and slave, but as partners in evolution." "Partners," Queen Celeria repeated, her tone dripping skepticism. "You funded terrorists to force partnership." "I funded revolutionaries to force change," Thex corrected. "You would have clung to the old ways until both species were extinct." "He's not entirely wrong," Dr. Kalin said, entering the throne room with a datapad. "I've been analyzing the medical data from Sarah Reeves' body. Her augmentations were crude, but they revealed something remarkable. Human and Xenodraconic DNA are more compatible than we thought. With proper medical support, true biological fusion might be possible." "Abomination!" Dravos spat. "Evolution," Thex countered. "The same evolution that created us from the primitive reptiles of our homeworld." "This is academic," the Queen said sharply. "Lord Thex, you conspired against the crown. The penalty is death." "Unless," Lyra said quietly, "he invokes the right of challenge." Everyone turned to look at the young princess. The right of challenge was ancient law, older even than the Empire itself. Any noble accused of treason could demand trial by combat, with the twist that they could name a champion to fight in their place. Thex's eyes glittered with something that might have been approval. "I invoke the right of challenge, and I name Daniel Cross as my champion." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every eye in the room on me, waiting for my response. By law, I could refuse. But doing so would mean Thex's immediate execution and the loss of any chance to understand the full scope of what was happening. "I need to know everything," I said finally. "Every detail of your conspiracy, every person involved, every goal you were working toward." "Agreed," Thex said immediately. "But know this, human, you're not just fighting for my life. You're fighting for the future of both our species." The next 3 days were a blur of preparation and revelation. Thex, true to his word, revealed everything. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just about revolution or evolution. It was about survival on a galactic scale. The Void Hunters, Thex explained, showing me classified military files that should have been impossible to access. A species from beyond our galaxy, moving through space like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Our deep space monitors detected them 50 years ago. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach our space within a generation. And you think human xenodraconic hybrids can stop them? I think our only chance is to combine our strengths, xenodraconic power and longevity, with human adaptability and innovation. Sarah Reeves understood this, even if her methods were extreme. Her methods were genocidal, I reminded him. Yes, he admitted. She let revenge cloud her vision, but the core idea remained sound. I studied the data he'd provided, cross-referencing it with what I could access through the neural interface. The threat was real, or at least Thex believed it was. But that didn't justify the means he'd employed. Who's my opponent in the challenge? I asked, changing the subject. That would be me, Dravos said from the doorway. He'd been listening, of course. The Queen has named me her champion. I wasn't surprised. Dravos was one of the finest warriors in the palace, enhanced with military-grade augmentations that made him faster and stronger than any natural xenodraconic. In a straight fight, I wouldn't last 30 seconds. The combat will be tomorrow at dawn, he continued. Traditional weapons only. No augmentations. No technology beyond basic steel. That's not the tradition, Thex protested. Champions fight with whatever advantages they possess. The Queen has decreed it, Dravos said with satisfaction. Unless you wish to withdraw your challenge. Thex looked at me, and I saw real fear in his ancient eyes. Without technology, without the neural interface, I was just a human against a dragon. The outcome was predetermined. I accept the terms, I said, because what else could I do? That night, Lyra came to my quarters. She carried something wrapped in cloth, moving with the stealth that came naturally to her species. You're going to die tomorrow, she said matter-of-factly. Probably, I agreed. Unless you cheat. She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a blade, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was clearly xenodraconic in design, but modified with human aesthetics. The edge seemed to shimmer, and when I touched it, I felt a familiar tingle through the neural interface. This is technology, I said. It's forbidden in the challenge. It's not technology, she corrected. It's biology. The blade is grown, not forged. It's alive, in a way, and it responds to neural input, but through organic channels, not technological ones. How is that possible? Dr. Kalin has been experimenting with the compatibility between our species. This is her prototype, a living weapon that bridges the gap between human and xenodraconic. She pressed it into my hands. It's not cheating if it's part of you. Why are you helping me? She tilted her head in that bird-like way. Because you saved me 3 times now. Once from death, once from Sarah's weapon, and once from becoming the kind of ruler my mother is. The debt is paid, but the friendship remains. Your mother will see this as betrayal. My mother sees everything as betrayal or opportunity. She's forgotten there are other ways to see the world. Lyra moved to the window, looking out at the triple moons. I've been accessing the deep archives. Did you know that humans and xenodraconics once lived in peace before the Empire? Before the conquests? There was a colony where both species coexisted. That's impossible. First contact was only 20 years ago. Official first contact, she corrected. But there were earlier encounters, hidden from history. The colony failed not because the species couldn't coexist, but because both governments feared what that coexistence meant. She left then, leaving me with the living blade and more questions than answers. I spent the remaining hours before dawn practicing with the weapon, feeling it respond to my thoughts and intentions. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced, neither fully technological nor fully biological, but something entirely new. Dawn came too soon. The arena was another relic of xenodraconic tradition, a circular platform suspended over a chasm that dropped into the palace's power core. The message was clear: victory or obliteration. The entire court had assembled to watch. Queen Celeria sat on a portable throne, her expression unreadable. Lyra stood beside her, showing no sign of our nighttime conversation. Dr. Kalen was in the medical section, ready to tend to the wounded or confirm the dead. And throughout the crowd, I spotted the faces of human servants, watching from the shadows where they thought they wouldn't be noticed. Dravos entered the arena from the opposite side, carrying a traditional xenodraconic warblade that was as long as I was tall. He'd shed his armor in accordance with the rules, but his scales alone were protection enough against most weapons. "You should have refused," he said as we faced each other in the center. "Dying for Thex's delusions is a waste." "Maybe," I replied, feeling the living blade pulse in my hand. "But I've learned something about your species, Dravos. You respect strength, but you value honor more. What honor is there in killing an unarmed opponent?" "You're armed," he pointed out, gesturing to my blade. "With a weapon a third the size of yours, against an opponent with natural armor and centuries of combat tradition bred into his genes. We both know how this ends." "Then why fight?" "Because someone has to," I said simply. "Someone has to stand between the old and the new, between what was and what could be. Might as well be me." He nodded slowly, and I saw something that might have been respect in his eyes. Then he attacked. The first strike would have cut me in half if I hadn't been expecting it. The living blade moved almost of its own accord, deflecting his massive weapon with a ringing impact that sent vibrations up my arm. But I didn't retreat. Instead, I stepped inside his reach, using my smaller size as an advantage. The blade responded to my intention, elongating slightly to give me the reach I needed. My strike scraped across his scales, leaving a line of green blood but no serious damage. He backhanded me, sending me rolling across the platform, but I kept my grip on the weapon. "Interesting," he said, examining the wound. "Your blade can pierce dragon scale. Kalen's work, I assume." I didn't answer, too busy trying to breathe through what felt like broken ribs. He came at me again, more cautious this time, using his reach advantage to keep me at distance. But the living blade was learning, adapting to his patterns. It began to anticipate his strikes, pulling my arm to block before my mind had fully processed the threat. The fight became a dance, deadly and beautiful. Dravos had every advantage except one. I had nothing to lose. He was fighting to maintain the status quo, while I was fighting for something I was only beginning to understand. "You're holding back," I gasped after a particularly close exchange. "So are you," he replied, and I realized he was right. The blade could do more, much more, but using its full capabilities would reveal its nature. "What are you afraid of?" I asked. "Change," he admitted, surprising me with his honesty. "I've served the royal family for 200 years. The Empire is all I've known. What Thex proposes, what you represent, it means the end of everything I've fought to protect. Or the beginning of something better. For whom humans, who would see us extinct, xenodraconics, who would lose their heritage to biological fusion." He struck again, and this time I was too slow. His blade caught my shoulder, cutting deep. There is no better, only different. I fell to one knee, blood soaking through my shirt. The crowd murmured, sensing the end. But as Dravos raised his blade for the killing blow, the living weapon did something unprecedented. It spoke, not in words but in images, directly into my mind through the neural interface. I saw the colony Lyra had mentioned, humans and xenodraconics living in harmony. I saw children, hybrid children, playing in streets that belonged to neither empire but to something new. I saw the void hunters Thex had warned about, and our united species standing against them. And I saw Dravos, not as an enemy but as a guardian, protecting not just the royal family but all life in the palace. "You're not my enemy," I said, rising to my feet despite the pain. "You never were. We're both trying to protect what we care about. The only difference is perspective." He hesitated, his blade wavering. "Pretty words won't save you." "No," I agreed, "but this might." I threw the living blade. It was a desperate move, one that should have failed. But the blade adjusted its trajectory mid-flight, responding to my desperate need. It struck Dravos's weapon at exactly the right angle, shattering the ancient metal into 1,000 pieces. The crowd gasped. Breaking an opponent's weapon didn't end the challenge, but it changed everything. Dravos stood weaponless, and tradition demanded I press my advantage. Instead, I walked to where the living blade had landed and picked it up. Then I did something that no one expected. I knelt and offered it to him. "I yield," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What are you doing?" Thex shouted. "You had him defeated." "No," I said, still holding the blade out to Dravos. "I had him disarmed. There's a difference. Captain Dravos has served with honor for 2 centuries. That deserves respect, not humiliation." Dravos stared at me, then at the offered blade. "You would trust me with your weapon." "I would trust you with more than that," I said. "I would trust you with the future." He took the blade, and I saw him feel its nature, the fusion of human and xenodraconic that it represented. His scales shifted through a complex pattern of emotions I couldn't fully read. "This is what Kalen has been working on," he said quietly. "This is the bridge between our species." "One of them," I agreed. He looked at the Queen, who was watching with an expression of calculated interest. Then he looked at Thex, whose face showed a mixture of hope and fear. Finally, he looked at me. "The challenge is concluded," he announced. "Neither victory nor defeat, but something else. I call for the right of judgment to be suspended, pending further investigation into Lord Thex's claims about the Void Hunters." "You don't have that authority," Queen Celeria said. But there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely displeased. "I have the authority of precedent," Dravos replied. 300 years ago, a challenge ended in mutual respect rather than death, and that led to the Peace of Kelos that expanded our empire peacefully for the first time. Perhaps it's time for such precedent again." The Queen stood, her wings spreading slightly. The entire crowd held its breath. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled. It wasn't a warm expression, but it was genuine. "Very well," she said. "The challenge is suspended. Lord Thex will remain under house arrest while we investigate his claims. Daniel Cross will continue his work in the medical wing, exploring this biological fusion that seems to fascinate everyone." She paused, her gaze finding mine. "And Captain Dravos will oversee a new initiative, a joint human xenodraconic task force to assess the threat of these void hunters." "Mother," Lyra said, stepping forward, "I request to be part of this task force." "You're too young," the Queen said automatically. "I'm old enough to invoke ancient law, old enough to see what others miss, and old enough to know that our future depends on understanding, not just strength." Lyra's golden eyes were fierce with determination. "Besides, someone needs to make sure they don't kill each other." The Queen studied her daughter for a long moment, and I saw her seeing what I'd seen weeks ago. Lyra wasn't just a child anymore. The assassination attempts, the conspiracy, the challenge, they'd all shaped her into something new. "Very well," the Queen said finally. "But Dr. Kalen will accompany you. Medical expertise will be necessary for what's to come." As the crowd dispersed, I found myself standing with Dravos, who still held the living blade. "This weapon," he said quietly, It's remarkable. It adapted to you, learned from you, became an extension of your will. And now it will do the same for you, I said. That's what partnership means. Not domination, not submission, but adaptation. He nodded slowly. Thex was right about one thing. Change is coming whether we want it or not. The question is whether we guide it or let it destroy us. Together, I said, offering my hand in the human gesture of agreement. He looked at it for a moment, then clasped it with his clawed hand, careful not to pierce my skin. Together. Later that evening, I found myself in Dr. Kalin's laboratory, helping her catalog the biological samples from Sarah's augmentations. The work was grim, but necessary. Each piece of data potentially crucial for understanding how human and xenodraconic biology could merge safely. You threw the challenge, she said, without looking up from her microscope. You could have won. Winning would have meant Thex's vision triumphed. Losing would have meant the status quo remained. Neither outcome would have brought real change. And mutual respect will... It's a start, I said. Your people respect strength, but they also value wisdom. By yielding, when I had the advantage, I showed both. She looked at me then. Her scales shifting to what I'd learned was amusement. You're learning to think like us. And you're learning to think like us, I countered. That living blade wasn't just biology or technology. It was intuition made manifest, hope given form. Pretty words, she said, but there was warmth in it. I learned from the best, I said, thinking of Sarah and her ability to inspire, even when pursuing terrible goals. A chime at the door interrupted us. Lyra entered, followed by an unexpected guest. Lord Thex, despite being under house arrest, had been permitted to visit the medical wing under guard. I wanted to thank you, he said to me. What you did in the arena. It was unexpected. Your conspiracy nearly destroyed everything, I reminded him. Thanks aren't necessary. Perhaps not, he agreed. But understanding is. The Void Hunters are real, Daniel Cross, and they're closer than even I knew. He produced a data crystal, one that pulsed with an energy I didn't recognize. This arrived through our deep space monitoring network an hour ago. It's a distress signal from the Kelos system. Dr. Kalin took the crystal, inserting it into her analysis equipment. What appeared on the screen made us all step back in horror. Ships, if they could be called that, made of what looked like living shadow. They moved through space like cancer through a body, consuming planets and leaving nothing but void in their wake. How long, I asked. 6 months, Thex said grimly. Maybe less. They've already consumed 3 systems in the Outer Rim. And you think human xenodraconic fusion can stop them? I think it's our only chance, he said. These things consume biological matter, but they can't process certain hybrid proteins. Sarah Reeves discovered this accidentally. Her augmentations made her partially invisible to their sensors. How could she know that Dr. Kalin asked? Because she encountered one, Thex admitted. 3 years ago, just before the fall of Singapore. A scout, we think. She killed it. But not before it infected her with something that slowly drove her mad. The augmentations weren't just fusion technology. They were an attempt to fight off an alien infection. The implications were staggering. Sarah's descent into revenge hadn't just been trauma from the war. She'd been fighting a battle none of us knew about, slowly losing herself to an alien influence. We need to tell the Queen, I said. She knows, Lyra said quietly. She's always known. Why do you think she's tolerated the experiments, the biological weapons, even the conspiracy to some degree? She's been preparing for war. Just not the one everyone thought. You knew, I asked her. I suspected, she corrected. Mother doesn't keep secrets well from those who know how to look. But I didn't understand the full scope until now. So everything, the assassination attempts, the conspiracy, my presence here, It was all manipulation. I felt anger rising. No, Lyra said firmly. The conspiracy was real. Thex's goals were his own. Mother simply adapted to the situation, as she always does. But your choices, your actions, they were genuine. That's what makes you valuable. You can't be predicted or controlled. Neither can the Void Hunters, Thex pointed out, which is why we need unpredictability on our side. I looked around the room at these unlikely allies. A xenodraconic doctor who saw beyond species. An ancient lord who'd risked everything for evolution. A young princess who might be the wisest of us all. And me, a human who'd gone from servant to soldier to something undefined. Where do we start? I asked. With the living blade, Dr. Kalin said. It's proof that fusion is possible. We need to replicate it, improve it, make it scalable. And we need to understand Sarah's augmentations, I added. If they made her invisible to the Void Hunters, even partially, that's our starting point. We have 6 months, Thex said, to unite two species that have been at war for 20 years, to develop technology that shouldn't exist, to face an enemy we barely understand. We've done impossible things before, Lyra said with the confidence of youth. We'll do them again. As we began planning, I thought about Sarah's final words. Make it mean something. At the time, I'd thought she meant her death. But now I understood she meant everything: the war, the peace, the fusion of species, the coming storm. We would make it mean something. We had to, because the alternative was the void, consuming everything we'd fought for and everything we'd dreamed of. The transformation of the palace happened gradually at first, then all at once. Within weeks of the Void Hunter revelation, the rigid boundaries between human servants and xenodraconic nobility began to blur. Not by decree, but by necessity. The fusion experiments required human volunteers, and to everyone's surprise, they came forward in droves. I stood in what had once been the servants' quarters, now converted into a training facility. 30 humans faced me, each one someone I'd worked alongside during my years of invisibility. They knew me as Servant 4782, the one who kept his head down and mouth shut. Now they had to trust me with their lives. The neural interface is just the beginning, I explained, holding up one of Dr. Kalin's modified devices. Once it's integrated, you'll have access to palace systems, xenodraconic databases, and most importantly, the collective defense network we're building. But the integration process is painful, and there's a 20% chance of rejection. 20% chance of death, you mean, said Marcus, a maintenance worker I'd known for 2 years. He was older, gray-haired, with hands scarred from decades of labor. Yes, I said simply. I won't lie to you. Some of you will die, but those who survive will become something new. Not human, not xenodraconic, but something that might be able to stand against what's coming. And if we don't volunteer, asked Kira, the medical assistant who'd helped me in those early days, I'd noticed the way she looked at me had changed since I'd ceased being invisible. Then you continue as you were. No judgment, no consequences. This has to be a choice. Some choice, Marcus muttered. Remain slaves or risk death for evolution. You're not slaves, Lyra's voice came from the doorway. She entered with her usual disregard for protocol, Dravos shadowing her as always. You never were, though I understand why you'd see it that way. Pretty words from a princess, Marcus said, and I tensed at his tone. Speaking to royalty like that would have meant death weeks ago. But Lyra just tilted her head in that bird-like way. You're right. Words mean nothing without action. She pulled out a neural interface, not one of the modified human versions, but a xenodraconic model. Captain Dravos, would you assist me? Princess, no, Dravos said immediately. Your mother would never approve. My mother is preparing for war. She doesn't have time to approve or disapprove. She pressed the device to the base of her skull. If I'm asking humans to risk transformation, I should be willing to risk it myself. The interface activated, and Lyra screamed. Not the controlled cry of pain I'd experienced, but something primal and wrong. Her scales flickered through the entire spectrum, her wings spasming. Dravos caught her as she fell, and I saw real fear in his ancient eyes. "Get Dr. Kalin," I ordered, already moving to examine Lyra. The interface was rejecting her, but not in the way we'd seen before. Instead of failing to connect, it was connecting too well, overwhelming her younger nervous system with data. "I can hear them," Lyra gasped, her golden eyes wide and unfocused. "All of them, every human in the palace, every thought, every fear, every hope." The human volunteers had unconsciously moved closer, drawn by something they couldn't name. I realized what was happening. Lyra wasn't just interfacing with the palace systems. She was interfacing with the collective human neural network we'd been building. "Don't fight it," I told her, holding her clawed hand carefully. "Let it flow through you. Don't try to contain it." "It hurts," she whimpered, sounding like the child she still was. "I know, but pain is just information. What is it telling you?" She focused on my voice, using it as an anchor. "They're afraid, not of death, but of insignificance. They want to matter." "They do matter," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Every single one of them matters." Dr. Kalin arrived, medical equipment floating behind her on anti-grav units. She took one look at the readings, and her scales went pale. "She's created a hybrid network. This shouldn't be possible." "A lot of impossible things are happening lately," I said. "Can you stabilize her?" "I can try." She began working, injecting Lyra with various compounds while monitoring her neural activity. The interface is rewriting itself, adapting to create bridges between incompatible networks. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It took 3 hours to stabilize Lyra. When she finally opened her eyes, they were different. Still golden, but with flecks of something else. Colors that shouldn't exist in xenodraconic physiology. "I understand now," she said quietly. "Why humans fight so hard for so little. You're not fighting for victory. You're fighting for meaning." "Princess," Dravos said carefully, "are you well?" She stood slowly, her movements different, more fluid, yet more deliberate. "I'm changed, as we all must change." She looked at the assembled humans. "I felt your fear, your anger, your hope. I know what it's like to be seen as less than you are. And I'm sorry. My people have been wrong about yours." "One apology doesn't erase 20 years of oppression," Marcus said, but his tone had softened slightly. "No," Lyra agreed, "but it's a beginning, and beginnings matter." Over the following days, more volunteers came forward. Not just humans, but xenodraconics too. Younger ones mostly. Those who'd grown up during the occupation and had human friends despite the prohibitions. The medical wing became a transformation center, with Dr. Kalin and I working 18-hour shifts to manage the integrations. Not all of them survived. We lost 3 humans and 1 xenodraconic in the first week. Each death was a blow, but also a lesson. We refined the process, learned to predict rejection, developed methods to ease the transition, and slowly, something unprecedented began to emerge. The hybrids, as they came to be called, were more than the sum of their parts. Humans gained access to xenodraconic longevity and strength. Xenodraconics gained human adaptability and creativity. But more than that, they gained understanding. Each hybrid carried within them the experiences and perspectives of both species. It was Marcus who first demonstrated the military applications. During a training session, he suddenly manifested scales along his forearms, crude and imperfect but undeniably protective. "I was thinking about armor," he explained. amazed at his own transformation. And my body responded. The interfaces aren't just connecting you to technology, Dr. Kalin realized. They're unlocking dormant genetic potential. Humans and xenodraconics share a common ancestor from millions of years ago. The fusion is reactivating those prehistoric connections. Queen Celeria watched all of this from a distance, receiving reports but never visiting the transformation center, until the day she did. She arrived unannounced, her presence filling the medical wing like a storm front. The hybrids immediately felt it through their shared network, a pressure that made newly grown scales itch and recently enhanced minds ache. "Show me," she commanded simply. I led her through the facility, showing her the training areas where hybrids learn to control their new abilities, the medical bays where Dr. Kalin refined the transformation process, the communal spaces where former enemies shared meals and stories. "You've created an army," she observed. "We've created a community," I corrected. "The army is just a side benefit." She studied me with those cold eyes. "You speak to me as an equal now. The servant is truly dead." "The servant was always a fiction," I said. "A role I played to survive, just as the tyrant queen is a role you play." Her scales flared dangerously. "You presume much." "I observe accurately. You're not a tyrant, Your Majesty. You're a survivor, same as me. Everything you've done has been to ensure your species' survival. The conquest, the oppression, even allowing these experiments. It's all been calculated to preserve xenodraconic civilization. And you think that absolves me? I think it makes you understandable. Not forgivable, but understandable." She moved to a window overlooking the training ground where Lyra was sparring with several hybrids. Her movements, a perfect fusion of xenodraconic power and human unpredictability. "My daughter thinks you're the future." "Your daughter is the future," I said. "She's what both our species could become if we stopped trying to dominate each other." "Pretty words," she said, echoing what seemed to be a favorite xenodraconic dismissal. "But the Void Hunters won't be swayed by pretty words." "No," I agreed, "but they might be stopped by what we're building here." She turned to face me fully. "Lord Thex has been sharing intelligence about the Void Hunters. What he hasn't shared is that they've sent a message." My blood went cold. "A message?" 3 words, in perfect xenodraconic and human languages: surrender or void. "They want us to give up without a fight. They want us to understand that resistance is futile. They've consumed 1,000 species. What makes us special?" "We're not special," I said. "We're stubborn. Humans and xenodraconics have been trying to kill each other for 20 years, and neither side has given up. That kind of persistence might be exactly what's needed." She considered this, then made a decision that surprised me. "I'm promoting you." "I didn't know servants could be promoted." "You're not a servant. You're the Strategic Defense Coordinator for the hybrid program. You'll have full authority to recruit, train, and deploy the hybrids as you see fit." She paused. "You'll report directly to me." "And Dravos?" "Will be your second in command. He respects you, which is more than most humans have achieved." She moved toward the exit, then stopped. "There's something else." The message contained coordinates, a meeting point, 1 month from now. "They want to negotiate, or they want to assess us before the attack. Either way, someone needs to go." "I'll go," I said immediately. "I expected you would. Take a team of hybrids. Show them what we're becoming." She paused at the door. "And Daniel, if this is a trap, if you don't return, know that what you've built here will continue. You've given us a chance. Don't waste it." The month that followed was intense. We accelerated the hybrid program, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Some volunteers developed abilities we hadn't anticipated. One human woman manifested bioluminescent patches that could blind opponents. A young xenodraconic male gained the ability to process and understand human technology intuitively, becoming a living computer. But it was Lyra who showed the most dramatic evolution. Her connection to the hybrid network had deepened to the point